Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. For the next year, I'll be teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam, where I'm currently at. Please welcome one of the world's leadership experts, Antonio Garrido, author of My Daily Leadership. Antonio, welcome.
Hello, Mark. Thank you ever so much for the invitation. I'm excited. This is going to be good. I don't think I've ever Zoomed to Hanoi before, but we'll see. But thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, we're glad to have you. So let's start off with you telling us about your background.
Well, there's a short answer or a long answer. I shall endeavor to keep it reasonably interesting. When I first came out of university a million years ago, because I'm fairly ancient, as you and I were talking before we turned the Zoom on, I was an architect. I came out of university as an architect, was fortunate to work for a really inspirational boss who, after a couple of years and a couple of promotions, asked me if I wanted to go back to university and do an MBA in strategic business management. Why, said I. He said, because really, and I think, Mark, he was kind of maybe suggesting that maybe I wasn't such a terribly good architect, but he said, really, you should run a few of our divisions. You're more of a leader and a manager than an architect, right? Which I thought, I don't know whether or not I should take that poorly or well. But anyway, so they funded that. So I then did an MBA in strategic business management, ran a couple of businesses. And then, more by luck than judgment, Mark, I just kept moving on and moving on and moving up. And by the end of my working for other people stint of my life, I kind of ran what you might call for Fortune 60 companies with billions in revenue and thousands of employees. So I ran some very large and complicated businesses, and then decided to do my own thing. So I went to Miami. You can tell by the strong Floridian accent. So yeah, I went to Miami, set up a business there, a leadership and a management training company. We did rather well. And then I wrote a couple of books. And then I've always been so hugely interested in leadership because I had been fortunate enough to work for just the best I've ever seen. And so wrote this book, My Daily Leadership book, which has just been nominated one of the top 15 business books of the year, which we're really delighted about. And then, yeah, so I spend most of my time these days coaching leaders all over the world. Was that short enough? I could make it longer.
No, I'm so glad you're able to do that. And you have had, and you talk about in your book, the experiences you've had, and you also give great examples of other leaders, which made the book such a substantive book. So why did you write this book? And you've written another book before, but why did you write this one?
Well, I wrote this one because, well, actually, this is the first, I again mentioned before we came on air, this is the first of a series of 3. But I wrote this book because, well, kind of in the same way that I wrote my other 2 books, which were basically about sales and sales management, which is, quite different from leadership. But because I thought I had something to say. Mark, and I know we can go along to any kind of Barnes and Noble. I hope everybody knows what that means. I know that you and I do.
Of course.
Okay, so we can go along to any bookstore. There are lots around. And there are miles and miles, certainly shelves and shelves and thousands of books about leadership. And I'd read, I don't want to say most of them, a lot of them. And I thought most of them missed the point, or they all kind of touched on parts of it. And so I thought I had something to say from the experiences of the wonderful leaders that I worked for, but it couldn't be squeezed into one book. So this is, as I said, the first of three. And so I wrote the book to help leaders get a better understanding of what their responsibilities are, I guess is the best way to define the reason for why I wrote the book. And it seems to have resonated, seems to have struck a chord with lots of people, from small individual entrepreneurs all the way through to, again, Fortune 60s. So yeah, that's why. It certainly wasn't because I had nothing else to do with my time, I can promise you that.
You write early in the book that writing by hand into a notebook is better than typing. Unfortunately, myself, I can't even read my own handwriting, so I have to type. Why do it that way?
So that's a good question. And I guess if I had to define what's the biggest single sticking point that we have with our clients and leaders that we coach and train and so on, is this very point where they once they get over the principle that they have to journal, like every day, right? Once they've gotten over that, then the next issue is, what, by hand? Why by hand? Because I type everything these days. But we talk in the book, there is, and you're a lecturer, so you know this, but there is mountains of information and data that say recall and understanding and all of those good things are significantly, not by 1 or 2%, but significantly improved when somebody actually writes by hand. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Talk a lot about it in the book, but to summarize it, when you have to think of something and type, it kind of short circuits, and you don't, because you can type faster than you can write, because writing is dreadful. And I'm like you, I could write something and take it to the chemist and they'll make me go for athlete's foot, right? So I'm the same as you. But when you actually have to then, when you think of an issue and then you have to edit, because you have to try and reduce the number of words down. So you go through an edit, so you go through a consideration process, then an editing process, then your brain tells your hands to actually reveal those words, and then your eyes check it. And there's this feedback loop between, yes, that's what I meant to say, and because it slows you down and it intellectualizes you. And we have an app, right? We have the world's best app, and it's so super duper. And anyone on our course, they can engage with all of our stuff on their app. And whilst we want them to do that, one of the biggest issues, as I say, I promise you, Mark, is that's all well and good, but can you commit that to paper with a pen on paper in a really, really nice journal, that nice and big, and give your thoughts some room and space to breathe. But actually what happens, Mark, is quite interesting. After about, and I'm going to say, this is not based on any research whatsoever, but just our experience and all of our people that we coach and train and they're on our program, I'm going to say about 90 days. So about 3 months time. What then happens is we send them new journals every 3 months in the post, right? Snail mail, dreadful, but they have it on their app, but we discourage that. We want them to do it by hand. If we're ever late with not we, but FedEx or the postal service, are ever late for whatever reason, they lose their minds, because it takes about 90 days, and that once that 90 days is over, they get over that hump, they never stop writing. So they
got into the discipline of it.
Yeah, but it's also one of the things that leaders do is they're all moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and like nobody wants more things on their calendar. Everybody wants fewer things on their calendar, and they're constantly fighting that time issue. And you'll be amazed at how that 5 or 10 minutes in the morning and 5 or 10 minutes in the evening actually becomes their journal, their hand, their leather-bound, hand-stitched journal that we supply. It actually becomes their best friend, and it becomes a record for people. So I have 2 or 3 I can think of right off the top of my head, leaders who actually show their people their thoughts, their thinking, and they'll go back and say, oh, we talked about this a while ago. And it's not a to-do list, to be really clear. This is not a to-do list. This is actual journaling. And if anybody tells you in any in any vertical, any market, any pursuit, any discipline, that they are serious about developing themselves and their people and their business, and they don't journal, don't believe them. Because anybody you can think of that's, you know, hugely famous, and we can talk about unsuccessful, I'm sorry, we can talk about what success is, but anybody that is successful, they journal. They all journal. So that's why. Good question.
Interesting. So you quote former 76ers general manager. I'm a Philly guy, live near the Art Museum when I'm in Philadelphia, not in Hanoi. Sam Hinkie, regarding believe in the process. Why did you use that quote related to keeping a journal and developing into a better leader? Because you've been starting to talk about that more now.
So I think that's another great question, Mark. But I think it's a little like, I actually saw Simon Sinek talking about a very, very similar, and you know, he's significantly more eloquent than I. But for those of you that don't know who Simon Sinek is, he's kind of, you know, one of the kind of things similar to, you know, what we do is, you know, sort of a leadership guru. We shared a stage a couple of years ago, super duper guy. And he said, look, imagine somebody says, you know, I want to go to the gym for whatever reason. I want to, I don't know, lose weight or increase fitness or stamina or lean muscle, whatever, right? Somebody says they want to go to the gym. And if they looked, you know, if they took all of their clothes off and stood in front of the mirror and looked in the mirror and go, okay, I got it, and took a photo, right? And then went to the gym and then sweated and toiled and bent and stretched and all of those things for an hour or two, came back and then stood in front of the mirror, they wouldn't see any change, right? There's just been bending and sweating and stretching for 2 hours, no change. And if they did the same the next day, no change. And if they did the same the next day, no change. But if they did that consistently over a period of time, then you would see a change, right? And if you continue to go to the gym and continue to focus on, I don't know, your nutrition and sleep and water and all those kind of things, over time, these effects compound. Well, it's the same. It's the same with journaling. It's the same with self-development, people development, company development. From one day to the next, not much changes, right? But if you stick to the process, you believe in the process, and you commit to the process, over time, things compound, things develop, good things happen. And it's kind of if you've heard of Sir Tom Brailsford, it's the law of marginal gains, right? I'm sure you teach this in your class, right? Where if you just get 1% better at something consistently every day, every week, 1% better, then before long, you're 38% better, then you're 52% better, then you're 76% better. So to answer your question, it's about the law of marginal gains that compound over time. One day to the next, that you don't see any difference, but over time it works. And it's like brushing your teeth. So we brush our teeth every day. Why do we brush our teeth every day? Why do we brush it every morning? Brush them every morning, brush them every evening. And we don't just kind of save it all up and then just brush our teeth for an hour every Sunday till our gums bleed, right? Because that isn't how you brush your teeth, right? So it's every day, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, and that's how you keep your teeth. I remember talking to a dentist of mine some years ago, and he said, you need to floss. And I went, what? Like every day? He said, yeah, every day. That's what, all my teeth? He said, no, just the ones you want to keep. So,
of course.
so that's what we mean by that, I think. Trust the process.
Before we get into your book, are there magazines, blogs, and podcasts you listen to about leadership that you think would be helpful for the audience?
There are masses. I love Diary of a CEO, which is one of my favorite blogs. I love the Dave Stachowiak, which is I think it's called Leadership Lessons from the Boardroom, something like that. David Stachowiak. I love him. I love anything by Rory Sutherland, who is he's actually live this very minute on Nudge Stock, which is the Ogilvy annual kind of retreat, but I couldn't be there right now because I'm here with you guys. So
Okay.
anything by Rory Sutherland, who he's the CEO of Ogilvy, which was the organization started by David Ogilvy. If you don't know who he is, I'm sure you do.
The advertising agent.
Yeah, yeah. We talk about David Ogilvy quite a few times in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, genius.
So how do you define leadership?
Oh, do you know, this is the question I least like, because it's a tricky one. You know, it's a little bit like, how do you define truth or beauty? You can kind of get a little esoteric in some of the answers, but you know, I could be pithy and say that leadership is the ability to generate followership, right? I could be pithy and say those kind of things, but rather than define what leadership is, because I don't think I've ever seen a really precise, concise, all-encompassing definition of leadership, right? Anywhere, ever. And that's from anybody. That's the, you know, the Maxwells and the cynics and all of those, even the Marshall Goldsmiths of this world, right? Or the Daniel Goleman, you know, EQ, emotional intelligence, you know, all of those kind of big thinkers. So I don't think I've ever seen, and I haven't yet developed, a great definition of leadership. What I know is important is what leaders do, right? And I know the kind of things that they should be thinking about. So maybe that would help. But if you're going to demand that I give you a definition of leadership, look at me, like the leadership expert. I'm going to decline, because it's too esoteric. It's like truth and beauty. But I know what leaders do. I know what they should do. Would that be useful if we talk about what their role is, as opposed to a
Yeah, for sure.
leadership? Yeah. And it's not because I don't know what leaders do, because it's all we do, right? Is teach leadership. But there are so many facets to it that it's a bit like, yeah, you know, what is a father? Right? What is a father? I mean, define a father. You go, well, biologically, you know, it's somebody that shared some genetic material with a mother, right? So you could get to that point, but it actually doesn't kind of inform the debate very much. But so leaders have to make decisions. So we know that. And of course, what we hope is that they make a few really high quality decisions rather than lots and lots and lots and lots of decisions. So we need a lot of discernment about decision making. So that's one of the things that we need to put into our melting pot for our definition of a leader. We know that their job is to future-proof themselves, their people, and therefore by default their business. So that's a little bit like the Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there, right? It's a bit the you know, skate to where the puck is going to be. So we know that that's also what they have to do. They have to future-proof themselves, their people, and therefore by default their business. We have a model for leadership which just talks about the 5 main pillars of leadership, which is you know, they have a responsibility to develop people, as we mentioned, to develop their company, to develop themselves, to develop strategy, and to develop other leaders. So we have this principle of people development, company development, strategy development, self-development, leadership development. So we know that that's what they have to do. We also have our model of leadership, and I think this is kind of where I'll leave it, and hopefully I'm going to get to your answer. We have a model of leadership that says, look, really what leadership is about maximizing potential. It's maximizing your own potential, your people's potential, your business's potential.
Right.
So it's potential maximization more than anything else. And well, how do we do that then? Because that sounds like one of those very, you know, esoteric, slightly ephemeral aspirations with no real substance behind it. So let's break it down into its kind of 4 areas. So let's imagine that we were talking to Ivanhoe before we started. Hi, Ivanhoe. If we were going to try and maximize Ivanhoe's potential, right? Where would we start? How would we do that? Well, so the 4 areas of one of the things that we have to focus on is kind of Ivanhoe's beliefs and values. So let's talk about some conceptual issues with Ivanhoe's beliefs and values. Where did they come from? Was he born with them? No, he's learned them, he's developed them. So we've got something, it's something to do, if we were going to maximize Ivanhoe's potential, it's got something to do with helping him with his beliefs and values. Okay, but just believing isn't enough. So we also then need to hold him accountable to some actions and initiatives, right? You've got to do something. So we want those actions and initiatives to be fairly high quality, right? So we've got some good beliefs and values. We've got some good actions and initiatives. We also then, well, if we're doing some actions and initiatives, we've got to make sure that the skills and abilities and techniques of those actions and initiatives are also high quality. So we've got to also look at skills and initiatives. And then finally, we've got to deal with this principle that all leaders have, which is kind of these gaps in their, it's kind of blind spots, right? So we have to build self-awareness and EQ so we can identify these gaps so that we can then close those gaps. So it's about beliefs and values, actions and initiatives, skills and abilities, and emotional intelligence and self-awareness. I did a talk just before COVID hit in Florida to about 400 leaders from all sizes, companies, all markets, all structures, all that kind of stuff. And I asked the audience, who were all leaders, by a show of hands, who here has no leadership blind spots, right? So by a show of hands, who has no leadership blind spots? Now, thankfully, Mark, right, in a great display of self-awareness, nobody put their hands up, where everybody accepted, well, do you know what? I probably do have some leadership blind spots. Terrific. So there were no hands, which was a good start. So the supplementary question, which is obvious, and you can already see it coming, I'm sure, I was like, okay, great. So we all recognize that we have blind spots. Will everybody do me a favor? And please, by individual, write down what your blind spots are, right? Now we have a problem because they recognize that they must have some blind spots, but what they actually are is, well, if they knew, then they wouldn't be blind spots. So now it gets tricky. So how do we figure out, how do we grow that EQ, that emotional intelligence? How do we build that self-awareness so that we can discover and deal with our blind spots? Well, that's tricky. So that's why we have to do this reflexive and reflective daily kind of
journaling, and got to write it down or else it doesn't stick. We have a question from the audience. You mentioned Goldsmith and Gordon as some of the thought leaders at the top of your list. Are there any women on your list of top thought leaders?
In the leadership space?
Yeah.
So the best woman that I ever saw and spoke to, leadership, in terms of leadership, was a lady called Condoleezza Rice, who I'm sure,
yeah, of course,
I'm sure any Americans on the line will know who Condoleezza Rice is. So tremendous understanding of leadership. Let's see who else. I confess, so Mary Kay Cosmetics, Mary Kay of Mary Kay Cosmetics.
Yes.
Big fan of her principles of business development and leadership. So I like her too. This is going to be very divisive, I think, but I did like some of her principles. Margaret Thatcher, okay, who was the British Prime Minister for the longest,
for a decade.
Yeah, for maybe, I was going to say maybe 15 years or so. Now, early Margaret Thatcher, not late Margaret Thatcher. So just to be clear, early Margaret Thatcher, not late Margaret Thatcher. So yeah, a few in there. Oh, and I tell you who I really love. I love the lady whose name escapes me, will come to me in a second. The lady that developed Spanx, S-P-A-N-X, so Spanx, which is like a ladies.
Yeah, yes, I'm forgetting she's in Atlanta, Georgia. Yes.
Yeah. The tenacity that she had to build her business What Sarah Bright, yeah, thank you for that, was
Yeah.
absolutely phenomenal. In terms of a case study of grit and determination and getting your business off the ground.
But I think, Antonio, what she's actually asking here is, and I'm kind of struggling with this, trying to think of this myself, and I've had a lot of women authors on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is which ones are thought leaders like Goldsmith and Gordon? You know, are there any women thought leaders in leadership that you pay attention to? And I'm struggling
Yeah.
myself.
No, I have, again, so somebody Googled this. We actually put a lot of her thought, a lot of her philosophy into this book, and more specifically into the leadership assessment that we developed. And it's the lady whose name will come to me in a second, or somebody Google it. It's about Dr. Carol Dweck, who wrote the book about fixed mindset. Beautiful, 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 slightly clunky book, but beautiful philosophy on leadership. So yeah, Dr. Carol Dweck, I guess, would be my favorite of them all.
So what's the differences between great and good leaders?
Okay, so there are many. So one of the things when we engage with our new clients, it's an interesting, when we first engage with leaders, we tend to ask them some very pointed and tricky questions. Can I give you an example of what some of those questions might be? And it does go to answering your question, I promise. So let's imagine, Mark, that you were the CEO of an organization, some millions. So we, kind of middle of the road, not billions, but then, not brand new. So,
Middle market company.
What's that? Sorry?
A middle market company.
Yeah. Okay. And let's just pretend for the sake of argument that you have, I don't know, 30 people. I don't know, right? So I'll say to you, okay, Mark, so let's think about this for a second. I'll say, let's draw a standard deviation bell chart, right? I'll say you probably have 20% A players, you probably have 60% B players, and you probably have 20% C players, right? And everybody accepts that, that's probably how the world works, because, on average, the Himalayas are flat, right? So on average, that's kind of how the world works. So I'll say, okay, well, so then tell me about some of your C players. So they'll say, okay, George. I'll say, okay, brilliant. And I'll write down George, and then who else? Mary, who else? Tom, because they're pretty much front of mind with, leaders. They know who their A players are, they know who their C players are, and kind of the movable middle sometimes get forgotten about. But anyway, I say, okay, well, tell me about George. How long has George been with you? What does he do for the organization? Whatever. George has been with us for 6 years, and I can't remember the names now. Mary's been with us for 3 years, and Tom's been with us for 2.5 years. I'll say, okay, great. And then I said, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Mark. Did you hire them like that, or did you make them like that? Right? C players who've been with them for years, right?
Right.
Yeah. Let's imagine they say, well, we hired them like that. Well, that doesn't really speak terribly well for their hiring process, the recruitment process, and all of that kind of stuff, right? If they say we made them like that, well, that doesn't speak well for their culture particularly, right? And if they say they don't know, then that doesn't speak particularly well to their leadership skills and abilities, or you get the idea. So we kind of start to ask these really searching questions, not to embarrass anybody or to catch anybody out. It's not a gotcha exercise. We're not trying to make things difficult for people. We're just trying to have them think about things in a slightly different way. Now, Mark, I confess I've forgotten the question. Really, ask me again. I know that was moving towards it.
The difference between good and great leaders.
Oh, yeah. Right. So we asked them some bunch of questions, really make them mentally sweat. And then we asked them this. So Mark, tell me, do you want to be like a below average leader? Do you want to be an average leader? Do you want to be a good leader? Do you want to be a great leader? Do you want to be a best-in-class leader? Do you want to be a world-class leader? What kind of leader do you want to be? You would be What do you think the answer would be, Mark?
Everybody wants to be a world-class leader.
No, you would be staggered, Mark, how many times they say, no, I want to be a good leader. No, I want to be a great leader. Sometimes they say, no, I want to be a world-class leader. And some of them go, very few of them go, I want to be, a best in class. And very few say a world-class leader. And you go, why wouldn't that be?
It doesn't even make sense to me.
Doesn't make sense, right? Why wouldn't every one of them say, I want to be, world-class? Why wouldn't they? Well, because it comes to this, that beliefs and values that we were talking about, that conceptual stuff, and maybe that imposter syndrome and all of those kind of stuff. So we play this game, and it was a game, wasn't really a game, but it was an exercise. And all of so Ted and Benjamin and Ivanhoe, do this, follow along for this. It's a really, really, really telling exercise. So I just been given one of those fairly significant leadership roles that I was talking about earlier. We talk about this in the book, but anyway, and the chairman of the group, on my second or third day with the organization, there was a note left on my desk because, as you and I were talking earlier, Mark, we're both ancient, and this was before email was arrived, right? So handwritten note with a beautiful fountain pen note on my desk, please come and see me. So I went to go and see this chap. In truth, I shouldn't really have been given this role. It was political, expedient, and I wasn't ready.
So what happened?
What's that?
So what happened?
Right. So the CEO, group CEO, said, welcome aboard. So glad and da 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 da. He said, have you ever, and this is the question for everybody listening, have you ever worked for a terrible leader? Right. And I'm sure that most people here can instantly think about, the dreadful leader that they've worked for in the past, maybe work for now, who knows? I hope not. So I said, yeah, of course. He said, terrific. He said, do me a big favor. And he passed me a piece of paper and a pen, slid it across the desk and said, will you write down, the kind of characteristics of dreadful leadership, what a dreadful leader is about. Now, I can't, in truth, Mark, in detail remember everything I wrote in that first pass, but it was probably something like everybody's thinking about, maybe a micromanager, maybe blow hot and cold, favorites, bad at strategic planning, poor decision making, whatever your own image of dreadful leadership is. So I slid the list back. He said, terrific. He said, well, write me some more. So I wrote another 4 or 5 things, and he said, great, just give me a few more. And now I have a list of about 12 things of what a dreadful leader looks like, right? It will be nearly everybody's list would be the same, I imagine. He said, great. He said, now, Antonio, he said, would you do me an enormous favor? I said, yes, of course. What can I do? He said, whilst ever you are leading this company, he said, well, can you promise to never, ever do any of those things that are on this list, right? So I went, oh, gosh, well, I'll try. He said, well, try every day, okay? He said, put that piece of paper in your pocket. And he said, if ever I see you in the corridors, in the cafeteria or whatever, he said, seek me out. And he said, and we'll chat about it. So keep that list with you at all times. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Mark, hold on, he's not telling me what a great leader is. But sometimes one of the best ways to figure out what to do is to actually figure out what not do. So we're talking to our leaders, our new clients, and we'll say, okay, create this list for us of what does dreadful look like, right? And then I asked them, when was the last time you did any of the things on this list, right? When was the last time you did X? When was the last time you did Y? Tell me about the last time you did Z, right? And then you'll be amazed at how often those with good self-awareness, because we do an assessment and we know those with good self-awareness actually are quite in touch with their list of dreadfulnesses, and those with poor self-awareness go, I've never done those kind of things, right? But then when you ask them, so how come you got all of these C players? How come you got masses of turnover? How come you're not making the profits? How come you're behind on your business, right? And they always externalize their issues. So back to your question, what does great look like? Great looks like somebody that has a very clear image of what greatness looks like. They have very high self-awareness. They have very high EQ. They are consistently trying to raise the bar, knowing they're never going to, reach their full. It's a bit like Wimbledon at the moment. It's on in England. The tennis tournament?
Yeah, of course, I've been watching.
Okay. Oh, okay, splendid. So if you could imagine, I don't know, let's say Novak Djokovic, just for the sake of argument, right? So world number one, or is it Federer? Anyway, no, I think it's Djokovic at the moment. So,
yeah, Djokovic it is.
Yeah.
Federer's retired.
Oh, yes, correct. So now, of course, today he's playing in Wimbledon, but what's he going to be doing next, 2 weeks on Friday? Will he be lounging around watching TV, eating pizza every day? No, he'll be working with his coach every day, right? He'll be trying to get better every day.
To the next level.
And he's the best in the world. And he's the only guy in the world that can say, I got this figured out, right? And if even he or Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods or whoever, right? Whoever.
Yeah, they said Michael Jordan took 200 shots every day. And they said if he's the best player in the world and he took 200 shots every day after practice, what does that tell you? So, Antonio, one of the questions I think a lot of us want to know as leaders is, how do you engender trust that your own people won't hesitate to tell you when you aren't doing a good job?
This is one of the trickiest issues of them all, because one of the other questions, Mark, we ask our clients when we first start coaching them is, let's again pretend it's you, Mark. Say, hey, Mark, what percentage of the time do you think your people tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Right? What percentage of the time do you think your people tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Now, we all know, Mark, it's not 100%, neither is it 0, right? But what people are telling you, Mark, is a version of the truth that they think it's in their best interest to have you believe. One of the great kind of examples of this, perhaps, because nobody would come along to your office, Mark, and go, hey, Mark, you got 5 minutes? You go, yeah, sure, come in. What's up, George? They go, I just wanted to let you know that I've been watching your performance over the last 6 months, and quite frankly, it's dreadful. I think you're terrible at this. You're awful at that, and you couldn't be worse at this. And where on earth did you think that was a good idea? That never happens. It's hard to tell someone they've got an ugly baby, right? And I remember that George Bush Sr. was just ex-president, but you chaps still call the ex-president Mr. President, ever so confused. But anyway, so he was no longer the president. He was just walking off the 18th green at a pro-am golf tournament, and somebody shoved a camera in his face and said, how was the golf, Mr. President, right? And he thought for a second, then he said, do you know what? He said, it's amazing how many games of golf I've lost since leaving the White House, right? So why? What's going on there? Well, whilst ever he was the president, everybody let him win, right? Now, here's the problem. Whilst ever you're the boss and sign everybody's checks and you decide what gets reflected in the next salary review and who gets the key to the executive washroom and where the car park spaces are allocated, right? It's going to be tricky. So come back to this principle of trust. The group chairman I was talking to you about earlier, the one that said that write me this list of dreadfulness, right? He came to the boardroom one day. We had just had an employee engagement survey taken of 17,000 people that worked for the company, cost about £250,000 back in the day when £250,000 was a pretty penny, right, Mark? And they produced this report, about employee engagement and what did everybody think of the board. And it was like the New York Yellow Pages, again dating myself, but anyway, the New York Yellow Pages, for anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, was probably, I imagine it was like this thick. So this report came out as this thick. The executive summary was like 200 pages long, and it turns out that people didn't trust us. It turned out that employees didn't trust the board, and so the group CEO asked the whole board, there were like, I don't know, 15 people in the room, to all stand up. He said, cup your hands, like cupping your hands like this, as if you were holding water. So he said, imagine you were all holding some water in your hands. And he said, and your job is to not let any water trickle out from between your fingers, right? How would you hold it? And everybody says, very, very carefully, and you'd really focus on it. He said, what if we had to move from here to the other side of the room? Yeah. Would we move fast or slowly? We'd move slowly. Would we pay more attention or less attention? More attention. And on and on and on. He said, okay, now let's imagine that that's the trust, right, that people have in us, that's the water in your hand, that represents the trust that people in the organization have with us, the leadership team. He said, now do this, do that, right? We kind of all did that. He said, okay, where's the water now? The water's on the floor. He said, okay. So we've lost the trust of our people. He said, okay, now how difficult is it to get the water back off the floor and into your hands?
Impossible.
Impossible. And he said, don't forget, he said that the good that we do is written in sand and the bad that we do is written in marble. And we have to make sure, right, that it, okay, so I'm going to ask you the question. You ready, Mark? Imagine that you were a leader and I said to you, hey, Mark, what's your strategy for truth? What would you say, do you think? I'm not trying to catch.
No. My strategy for truth is just to be blunt, point blank honest about everything that they ask.
Terrific. It's to tell, we have to be, high in frankness, but also high in diplomacy.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, good. So we're not going to be rude about it, but we have to be very frank and we have to be high in frankness and high in diplomacy. Terrific. So that's our strategy for truth. Always, always tell the truth. Because if you don't, the good you do is written in sand, the bad you do is written.
It's not worth it.
So many leaders say, but I am like the very modicum of, I am the very exemplar of truth. I said, well, are you really though? And this is to one of my divisional managers. I said, are you really though? So he said, yeah. I said, well, the company that you just acquired and you told our internal people today that you'd purchased this company yesterday, how long had that been in plan? How long had that been in motion? He said, about 6 months. I said, did anybody know? Did you tell them? Did you tell them before today? He said, well, no. Why? Well, because I couldn't trust what they were. I said, oh, okay. Right. So I said, okay. So you don't tell the truth. You don't tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Yet you expect people to do the same for you. You don't trust them. You expect them to trust you. And trust isn't earned. Trust first has to be given. It first has to be given. Another leader I worked for, who wasn't quite as enlightened as some of the ones that we've been talking about, Mark, came into my office one day, very, very irate, very, very agitated, narrated about something or other. I said, what's up? I won't mention the person's name. I said, what's up? He said, did you know? And that Gillian, it wasn't Gillian, but did you know that Gillian was off yesterday? The reasonably senior individual in the organization. I said, no. He said, she was off yesterday. She went to her uncle's funeral and he was like livid. And I went, oh, you're joking. He thought I was on his side. I went, poor Gillian. And I had no idea. I'll have to hunt her out and say, I'm very sorry that her uncle's no longer around. And he went, no, you missed the point. I said, oh, tell me, what's the point? He said, well, if you look at our staff handbook, uncles is not on the list of close relatives. Jesus. Right? Okay, right. And I went, oh, okay. So he said, so what are you going to do about it? I said, well, let's call this person John. He wasn't John, but I'm so tempted to say his name, so I'm going to say John. I said, well, John, I think the first thing I'm going to do is go see Gillian tell how sorry we are for our uncle, sort out some flowers or so on. The next thing I'm going to do, and he goes, right. And he goes, the next thing I'm going to do is change that policy.
Yeah, I'm just thinking exactly that.
Right. And he goes, what do you mean? And I went, John, I nearly said his name again. I said, John, I think a good measure of whether or not we trust our employees is held in that company staff handbook. And to me, that looks like the Ministry of Manufacturing. And this needs to go, right? And so if we don't trust our people, how can we possibly expect them to trust us, right? So back to answer your original question, how do we build trust? Well, and it's a little bit like, you know, Richard Branson. I'm sure everybody knows who Richard Branson is.
Yeah, and Antonio, I'd like to get to a couple, some other questions.
Yeah,
here.
okay. Go ahead.
So in the book, you talk about Bill Gates promotes using mind maps. What are mind maps, and how do you maximize success using a mind map?
Okay, terrific. Great question. So one of the principles that we talk a lot about in the book and in our program with our leaders is making decisions using tools and mental models, right? Because so many leaders just rely on gut instinct and experience and stuff, and that experience is often because of confirmation bias and all that kind of stuff. We don't have time to talk about it, but it's very ropey and sketchy at best, right? When I ask leaders how are they making decisions and actually dig into it, it's not based on very much, Mark. And they know the tools that they know, and I know that you're a business professor, so you'll know what an Ansoff's matrix is. You'll know what Porter's 5 forces are. You'll know what the Shell directional G model is. You'll know what all of these things are. But most leaders don't know this stuff. They don't know about all of these tools and these mental models and these models to make decisions and, risk benefit analysis and all of that kind of stuff. Well, one of the things that they don't know is this principle of mind mapping. And Tony Buzan, a British chap, was the founder or the inventor, I suppose, of mind maps. And what mind maps are a really, really, really great way of, on a piece of paper with a pen, although there are apps available, please don't use them, of starting to think of an issue and start bringing together ideas. Those leaders that actually use mind maps in meetings are significantly more creative. Just Google, there are other search engines available, mind maps by Tony Buzan, and you'll see how great they are at getting the gray the gray cells working towards better problem solving. Why? Because here's the thing, what we're looking for in all leaders is to develop insight. And insight, right, which is in rare supply these days, and most large organizations these days actually recruit, not just for technical skill, not just for experience, but also for EQ that we talked about earlier, and also insight, right? Those that are really, really good at insight. And mind mapping is the best tool to develop insight. There you go.
So I want to know this for leadership planning and resource planning. Where is ChatGPT going to be fitting in here, and how seriously should we be worrying about that when it comes to people running organizations, and where will that all fit in?
Worried not. So how worried should you be? Don't be worried. Like if general intelligence does suddenly one day spark and suddenly the computer's going to take over the world, there's nothing we can do to stop that. So I remember once, a very, very short story, because I know my stories do ramble somewhat. When the internet first came out, okay, I was working for an organization who was selling products all around the world. And one of the places that we sold was into Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland was part of the British, the United Kingdom. But then Southern Ireland, ERA, was its whole different market. There was different tariffs and so on. Anyway, what somebody was doing was buying tons of our stuff. And I mean, genuinely, literally tons of our stuff into Northern Ireland and then shipping it a mile south into ERA and avoiding taxes and da, 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 da. and selling it for much cheaper than we could. We were in a board meeting and everyone was bemoaning this fact. And I said, hold on, guys, time out. Hands up here, who thinks the internet is going to go away? And of course, nobody put their hands up. I said, okay, good. Now we know that the internet isn't going to go away. It's our job. You know, when I said earlier, Mark, we've got to future-proof ourselves, our people in our business, right? If anybody didn't see ChatGPT coming 6 months ago, I don't know where you were looking, because everybody saw it coming, right? So, and it's not going to go away like the internet didn't when I mentioned it 30 years ago, right? So we know it's not going to go away. So let's think about whose roles ChatGPT is going to significantly influence. Anything from accountants to zebra stuffers, right? And everything in between, A to Z, whatever you do, ChatGPT is going to significantly impact your space, your world, your role. So you better get with the program, because if you're a radiologist, for example, does that mean that ChatGPT or some version of AI will destroy your job? No. But the radiologist who does have their arms around AI will outperform the radiologist who doesn't. The copywriter who does have their arms around AI will outperform the copywriter who doesn't. Right. So the leader that does have their organization embrace AI will outperform those leaders or organizations that don't. So don't be fearful of it. It's only like the people that, had stables and horses and carriages and made buggy whips right before Henry Ford came along and made the automobile, right? So you can be like King Canute and bemoan the fact that AI is here and it's changing the world, and you can kind of wish back the tide, but that isn't going to make the tide move, right? So yeah, embrace AI. It's a tremendous tool, has its limitations like any other tool, but it's no different from the mobile phone, the fax machine, the automobile, the aeroplane, and whatever. And there is another ChatGPT or AI just around the corner right now. As a world, we learned how to pivot pretty quickly when COVID came around, and those that didn't, unfortunately, fell by the wayside, right? So ChatGPT is just another COVID-19, and there will be another one around the corner. So embrace it.
No question. So Mark Zuckerberg is making a huge bets in the long term through investing in billions of dollars in the metaverse. And clearly Apple, Google, Microsoft all see the value because they're making their own investments. But Meta was taking a huge hit for their stock and a credibility hit. How can business leaders with investors who are typically focused on short-term results, what you call weather and climate, and look at long-term opportunities like climate? So what's your view on that?
So that's a great question. Most of the larger organizations, so I would say, and that doesn't mean they're particularly well run, but those larger organizations typically tend to have investors whose money is more of a Japanese approach to investing. What do I mean by that? That, the Japanese kind of investing culture is generational, right? They'll plan generations down the road. And I love that kind of philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Where the money is pension money, and it's like bonds and stocks and long money and all that kind of stuff. And they're normally pretty safe. And then more like the tech companies, like, the Zuckerbergs or Facebooks and so on. Tech companies and smaller companies tend to take much more of a shorter term view of investment. They typically have a different type of stock or stakeholder profile, let's put it that way. My experience, so the companies that I worked for, the companies I ran, and a lot of the companies that we decide to work with are more that long-term, large, we have a generational approach to things. Now, here's the thing. No organization can determine who buys their stock. It just can't be done, right? If it's on the open market, if it's traded, if it's, the bell rings and people start buying shares. So what can a leader do about that if they don't like their stock holding profile? Well, they need to readdress their core values. They need to readdress their vision, mission, goals. They need to make sure that the people around them are sharing all of that kind of stuff. And it will cascade down and it will fall through. So if you want that short-term, high-risk investor, it's really easy to do. Then just that's how you play the game. If you want that longer-term, more kind of
Warren Buffett type investor,
then you play the game differently. So you determine who buys your shares. Exactly.
It occurred to me from reading the book that successful people go through bad periods where nothing works, like a star basketball player missing a series of shots in a game. How can someone whose company and or career write their own corporate or personal ship through your methodology?
Great question. And I think it nicely, I don't know whether this was intentional, almost comes full circle to this principle of, trust or believe in the process, right? So I've worked for, again, it also connects beautifully to that question. What does a terrible leader look like? Well, so Mark, have you ever seen 7-year-olds playing soccer? Right?
Okay.
If you've ever seen 7-year-olds playing soccer, here's what happens. The ball goes over here and 22 kids swarm over to the ball. And then the ball goes over here and 22 kids swarm over here. And the ball goes over there and 22 kids. Have you ever seen businesses run like that? Where the CEO goes, this is the new theme for the day. And everybody swarms over. No. Shiny object over here. Now this is it. No, I didn't mean that. And I meant this. And the whole organization is zigzagging. It's a bit like how I play golf, right? I don't go down the middle. I kind of zigzag along the golf course. Well, the organizations that do that are kind of sort of exemplifying what you were just talking about. If you have a scarcity mindset where you think this isn't working, so let's try something else and flip and flop and flip and flop. But if you believe in the process and you have an abundance mindset, right, and you believe in the process, if the results aren't there, which results normally dollars, normally orders and margins and profitability, we call those lagging indicators. But if you concentrate instead of on the lagging indicators, those things, rather on the leading indicators, which are your values, your coaching, your process, your beliefs, and how you run things, if you do those things, those beliefs well, those behaviors well, those good skills and techniques, good emotional intelligence on those leading indicators, the lagging indicators will take care of themselves before too long. So believe in the process. Concentrate on the leading indicators rather than the lagging indicators.
Here's the last question. In the book, you write that most managers have a pretty clear development path for individuals that report to them. What was your process for developing talent, and how did that change over the years? And what will it take in the future to develop talent?
It's never changed over the years. So developing talent comes back to when you asked what the definition of leaders was. And I said, people development is the number one thing, right? Which is help people reach their full potential, masterful mentorship, understanding motivation, all of those good things. Organizing an organization that's very, very collaborative. Okay, so talent development is the most important, well, it's the second most important thing that you have to worry about. One is action bias, which is just get moving, make an imperfect start and course correct along the way. And the other thing then is that talent development piece. Starts with you though. And I cannot tell you, Mark, how many leaders when I have asked them, so how do we develop our people around here? And they go, oh, we've got a great process. What we do is we have PDRs, that's personal development reviews, once or twice, which isn't enough, but once or twice a year, still not enough, but anyway. And then we have this process, we have this system, everybody gets a score out of 10. We don't link it to salary review, good. And I say, okay, great, show me a couple of files. And we'll go over to HR and we'll pull out some files and we'll have a look at them. And I go, terrific, now show me yours. right? And everybody in the organization, all 500 people, have one of these files apart from them. And what does that talk about? You know, walking the talk, right? Judging themselves by their intentions and everybody else by their actions. And it's not about, you know, so I think walk the talk, figure out the 3 things that you, Mr. Leader, take an assessment, or Mrs. Leader, take an assessment, figure out where your gaps are, like you demand of everybody else, and sort it out for yourself first. Put your own mask on.
Antonio, I so enjoyed having you. And what I loved again about the book is that you had real world experience and you put that real world experience to work in the book, as opposed to theory. I'm always more focused on real world than theory. So I thank you so much, and especially for talking to us from France. It's funny, you're in France in one end of the world. I'm in Hanoi, Vietnam at the other end of the world, and we have people from around the world listening here. So thank you so much. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. And Antonio, we look forward to your next book.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I've enjoyed it.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, sir. See you later.
Bye-bye.